I am free to make my own choices and calls, but only within these narrow normed walls. I am free to choose and free to breathe, but only within what I am to perceive. I am free to task and to speak till I remain unheard at the societal peak. I am not chained, and yet I am tied, for I shall be free only till I abide. We have been ruled by men who live in an illusion that you can have freedom by government control. Joining us today is Ritwik Awasthi, a fellow curious mind, author of the Psych Effect blog, to talk about how did we get to a pseudo-democratic stage in governance, and when and how do the power mongers of society poison the roots of democracy they stand on. First of a two-part series. I am Nicola Penn, and welcome to episode 1 of The Age of Aquarius.
Hey, hi. Hi there, Ritwik. Glad we are finally doing this. So, we've had a lot of offline conversations about socio-political issues so far, and like only yesterday, we were talking about the emergence of cults and the whole concept of how they are formed and what they actually are. But to
Right.
start things off, let's just backtrack and see how we got here for once. I mean, how on earth did we get to a point in time where we live in a sort of pseudo democracy? Let's just see and start off with that. What are your thoughts?
I believe that anything that begins has a demise to it, right? And
Okay.
everything reaches its highest level or highest gratitude, highest point, as one could say. So, even with democracy, when it began as an alternative to what was existing, right? That was colonialism, and prior to that, one man's rule. So this came out from a lot of revolutions, the glorious revolution of
Ritvik,
England.
I think for all the listeners here, you should probably want to speak a little louder into the microphone.
Am I audible now?
Yes, much better. Please continue.
Okay, so I believe that democracy was nothing but an alternative to the existing uh, political structures that were there, right?
So
And it
you mean like
began
tyranny, basically, right? Kings and all that.
kings and rule of one man or rule of one class, and
Okay.
democracy came out as an alternative to it. So democracy, according to me, was never an idea in itself. It was more of an alternative to the existing structures. So if we talk about the glorious revolution of England, or if we talk about the American Revolution, or the main wherein the ideas of liberty, equality, and all these fraternity ideas they came in, the French Revolution, uh,
Yes, exactly.
these were more of an alternative to the existing structures, and it was just how to get out of something, right?
But
Uh,
okay, so I don't really understand what is the need. What was a need so pressing for everybody? Specifically, if you talk about the French Revolution and the whole tennis court episode and things like that. I mean,
mhm.
what really set off people against tyrannies? I mean, from as far as we can remember in our entire history, probably a little before. Till up till a little before the French Revolution, we have always been ruled by rulers. There has
Mhm.
always been king. There's always been tribesmen who are leaders, and 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 democracy somewhat feels like that today as well. But we'll get to that in a second. I mean, what was so pressing for people at that time point in time that they actually had to go out and revolt against an existing order which has been so persistently and somewhat successfully managing everything of what we call a civilization till that point in time. I mean, what was the psychological connection? What kicks you into that frame of mind that I will die, but I will not be ruled anymore unless I have a say in the decision making?
Okay, so going back, going back further more into the history, if you look at, I mean, there's this book called *Sapiens*. I don't know if you have read it or not.
Yeah,
Uh,
Yuval Noah Harari is I'm one of his biggest fans.
Yes. So even in Sapiens, he talks about that we believe that, or we tend to think that the rulers and one class ruling was always the greatest idea, and then democracy came out of it, right? But the truth is that if you look at the ancient societies and ancient models, whether it's Indus Valley or the Babylons or the structures that came after that, the society was much more holistic. There were tribes, whether it
Mm-hmm.
was Europe or whether it was Asian countries. There were tribes, and there was much more cohesiveness in the society.
Okay.
If a decision is being taken, uh, yes, there'll be elders taking the decision. For example, in Indian context, whether you have tribes or whether you look into the village system of India, uh, the elders taking the decision, or some people who have been given power by the people. When I say power, I don't just mean the democratic structural power, but power in terms of responsibility, wherein you rely on them, not just by the means that this is the only structure that you have, but by a tested ground that okay, these people are people who will take the right decisions for us, because you have grown with them, you have that cohesiveness, and you have that basic understanding that yes, these are the people whom we can rely upon, right? And
All right.
that's where I believe the entire system of panchayats, if you call it, or the entire system of the Viking tribes, etc., these came out of it. But
Correct.
uh,
Yes.
the the problem came in when there was I mean the entire, I won't say democracy also, but even the rulership and the aristocracy that came in when you wanted to expand. Because with this structure of cohesiveness and the structure of tribe, you can either fight the another tribe or you can sustain yourself. So this was much more a subsistence kind of a setup, wherein you are just sustaining the currently existing land or the currently existing resources that you have in front of you, and you're making the best out of it, and living, as you could say, a socialistic life. But then came the reason, or the came a logic of expansion, and this came from uh, this rose out of Europe, where you first see the nation states and the nations developing
Okay.
the
So
idea of a nation.
so
So earlier,
basically,
mhm,
right. So I mean, so basically, we are as a civil or as a group of people, we will look to expand from our current region of control to a wider region of control because of the finite resources and that I've eaten up practically everything in terms of natural resources there. Is that what you mean?
yes. So if you look at Alexander, if you look at Genghis Khan, if you look at Napoleon, or even in Indian context, if you look at the Mauryan Empire, or the Cholas, the Guptas, they went out of their or even for that matter Mughals, and then the Britishers, etc. They went out of their comfort zones, as one could say, or their own mainland, in
Mhm.
search of something,
Correct.
whether it was men, whether it was land, whether it was resources.
All
And
right.
that's when you needed one person to take all the decisions. That's where you needed one man to be held responsible. And if you want somebody to be held responsible, you need to give them the required powers. And that's where establishment of this aristocracy came in.
Correct. Yes, I agree with you, Tilia.
So yeah, so if you look at, like, as we were discussing about the existence or the origin of democracy, if you look at French Revolution, the ideas were very different from what later on Napoleon did. The
Hmm.
ideas were that of liberty, fraternity, equality, etc. And when Napoleon came into power, and I believe I don't remember the exact quote or the statement of Napoleon, but what he meant was, paraphrasing his words rather, uh, he said that these ideas sounds well, but the thing is, if you want to even establish these ideas, you first need to be a tyrant,
All right.
because
Yeah.
others won't understand you in a democratic setup or in an equality setup. Everybody will have their own voice, so you need to go beyond that, and you need to have that power to first rule them and then make them understand. And that's where he fell. And
Right. I
same
agree.
goes with, so this is where the democracy came in as an alternative, and nothing more than that,
All
I
right. So
believe. And
like basically like a kickback reaction, so that everybody has more of a say into the final decision making authorities and just the fact that we are also being heard.
Yes. So again, if you look back to the history, and if you look at World War One and World War Two, I believe that in a lot of studies and in a lot of historical context, you would realize that once World War One happened, and then there was a League of Nations that developed, which was the ancestor of United
The
Nations, the
United
current
Nations,
United
yes.
Nations. And then World War Two happened. So the reason for World War Two, I mean, there are multiple reasons. There were economic reasons, reasons related to resources, etc. But in order to create that environment globally, you needed to. And if you look at the current scenario, if you look at the scenario way back in World War Two, you would realize that very similar things are happening right now. Very similar things are happening right now.
Like what? So
So
for once, I can definitely feel a lot of polarization that is happening globally between races, between countries, between sects, between first world and third worlds, so on and so forth. But what else? But I mean, what other? Because see, from my and this is just me jotting down my memory here. What I remember is that the main problem, or the main agenda for Germany to rise up like that and be able to be polarized into Nazi and basically a non-Nazi sect, is that they were treated very, very unfairly during the Treaty of Versailles and everything like that. I mean, a lot of they practically crippled the country into submission by the rest of the European powers. But are we doing something similar right now as well?
yes, so I would like to just introduce a little bit of psychology here. I mean, understanding it from a social psychology perspective rather than a political perspective.
Uh-huh.
So, after the Treaty of Versailles and after whatever backlash that Germany suffered, and the other countries as well, whether it was Italy or Japan, they suffered, etc. There was a time when they needed the people of these countries, needed some sense of nationalism. And why this nationalism was needed? To justify this backlash, to justify this wrongdoings. Now there is one way to justify it rationally, by saying that you made wrong decisions, your governments made wrong decision, and as a country you might have made a, I mean, very problematic decisions, and hence it led to whatever the treaty says, right? And that's why you suffered this humiliation. But this is very tough for a basic common man to understand, that these were the political reasons, these were the economic reasons, these
Yeah,
were the military reasons, etc., etc. Because we go to office, we come back, and we don't have that time or energy to invest into studying and knowing the realities. So
certainly,
it's better to
certainly.
create a perception, no matter how false or wrong or right it is, right? We are not the judge of that, but creating a perception is much better than knowing the exact reality, because for knowing the exact reality you need to put in a lot of efforts, which you are not trained for as well. You have been sedated not to think for the reality. You have been sedated to accept the perception that has been given to you. And Hitler took the right advantage of it, came out at the right time. This was like being at the right place at the right time kind of an scenario. He was at the right place at the right time, and he took the advantage of this growing perception that whatever is wrong with Germany is because of Jews.
Okay.
So if you look at it, he was not the one to introduce it, right? But he was one to magnify it to such a great extent,
Right, and cause
right?
it
And
as one of the reason of polarization.
yeah. So, like for example, even today in India, if I ask somebody to look at the stats in terms of what is the GDP, what is the GDP growth rate, how much is there in manufacturing, and even if they know that, how do they know that, because in numbers you would see that okay, the GDP is kind of growing, right? Maybe not the same percentage, but it is growing, right? Things are steady, whatever. But if you tell them that from an economic standpoint or from a theory standpoint, if you are investing more into service sector, that is like a jobless growth,
Mm-hmm.
right? You need to invest on manufacturing, or you need to better your agriculture, because we are an agricultural society. You need to better the ways, and modify and modernize your agriculture. Now these are things for which one needs to have great understanding, and if not, they need to study a lot, or maybe research a lot before accepting any perception. But rather, it's better to say that no matter what is happening, whether it's economic or whether it's population, whether it's even for that matter coronavirus is because of one class and one religion, isn't it?
Yes, of course.
So that gives us a relief, that gives us a relief, and a position to point at, a people to point at, rather than pointing ourselves that maybe we must have made a wrong decision somewhere.
All right. So, yeah, so it's more like being in the know kind of thing. I know the answer for this. I mean, I know why this is happening, and I know that there are 500 things wrong with the world, and I know that it's because of, say, democracy, or because of Donald Trump, or because Xi Jinping in China not making the right decision, and the crony capitalism, or whoever I want to blame this all. So all this is definitely I can understand. I mean, all of this will definitely lead to polarization, and by polarization I mean a vast majority of people getting aligned to a same kind of a thought, a same kind of a mindset, and a common enemy of sorts, and that then can be utilized. So that is some kind of democracy in itself, right? When you have a large united group of people, whether they are right or whether they are wrong is hardly of any matter here, because when most of us feel a certain way, or want to do a certain, or want to blame a certain section of people or powers, etc., then we're free to do it, and then we can, and once you have enough numbers, you can probably go against them, and change it to your own betterment, right?
Yes. So if you look at time and again in history, I mean, why I say that, as we were discussing yesterday, why I say that this is not just politics now, or this is not just about democracy, or, any kind of setup now. This is much more than that. This is a cult now. They are trying to establish a cult, and not just, so I was also discussing with one of my friends that they are not power hungry, or they're not money hungry, right? The leaders of the world today, they are not power hungry, or they're not money hungry. They want to establish a different cult altogether.
Ritvik,
The reason
we're
is,
just losing you in terms of the volume again.
am I audible now?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. We'll try and maintain the same kind of volume here.
Sure, sure. So, as I was saying, I was talking to one of my friend as well, and again we were discussing the same thing, that they, like the leaders of the world today, they are not money hungry, or they are not power hungry anymore.
Okay.
They are much more than that. They are themselves a part of a cult, and they are trying to establish and propagate this cult, right? And everything, even us opposing them, is empowering them.
Okay, and how
So
exactly is that? I mean, is this, are you talking about a common cult that we are looking at here?
So, okay, so every leader or every nation would have a different set of, maybe a different chapter of this cult, but it is established. It is getting established all over the world, and same was the thing back in World War II, and that's why I say that there is a lot of similarity in World War II and the current situation. So
Right, right, right.
if you look at a cult, there are multiple things that you could now relate to the current situations, the current scenario, right? The first thing foremost, looking at a little bit of biology, they are trying to attack your dopamine,
Yes.
your pleasure hormone, your
Mm-hmm.
pleasure
Mm-hmm.
symptoms, right? They are trying to create that, because see, if you think, and if you think in a particular angle which you might not agree with, that requires a lot of efforts. That is hard work, actually, right?
Correct.
uh, Going beyond your current existent set of thinking. So it's better to be trapped in that thinking, because that gives you a pleasure, right? That gives you a validation that yes, my points are right, my view of the world is right. So the first thing foremost, what they're doing from a biological standpoint is attacking your dopamine. Now, but this is something that maybe a consequence of what all they're doing. But as far as I could see, I mean, this has always been there. Attacking the dopamine has always been there, whether it was done by political leaders or whether it was done by capitalists or whether it was done by advertising and marketing agents. But this has always been there. Another thing is, whenever a new cult emerges, they would establish some kind of, as I call them, I mean metaphorically speaking, some kind of drug. So again, giving you an example, when the Britishers and the colonial powers wanted to establish their stronghold in China,
Mm.
they were unable to find any way out,
Okay.
right? They were unable to seep into their society or seep into their political structures, because China has always been very strong with their way of living and their way of working, right? And they don't accept anything from the outside so easily, as I may call it.
Hmm.
So in order to seep into their society and seep into their economy or political structures, what the Britishers did was they started India-China opium trade.
All right.
Yeah, so that was a revenue generator for them from India as well. But at the same time, they were able to dominate the Chinese market because the Chinese became addicted to opium.
Correct. So
So
yeah,
now
so that also relates to a dopamine kind of a kick, right?
yeah, they have to now rely upon Britishers, and now Britishers can actually deal with them in their terms, in their own terms, rather than getting suppressed by Chinese, because they have now seeped into their society, so
Hmm.
to say. So I believe right now that kind of drug that they're using is, I mean, of course, it's very generic, but you know, uh, the social media can be seen as one of the biggest drugs, and they are now owning the industries as well, the industry that manufactures this drug,
Okay,
the
so you mean,
industry that manufactures this drug in itself.
yeah, so you mean that social media is the new form of opium that we are all being treated with.
Yeah,
All right. Yeah, I mean that does make some kind of sense. Although a little far fetched, but I can understand. But I can see the line of reasoning that's leading up to this. And yeah,
why
I.
I say this now, why this is an industry, or why this is um, why they own it, is because and why this is a drug is because, see, first, if you look at the progression of Indian media, right, if not the world per se, but if you look at Indian media, the first step was in television media, I mean, the first step was to just tell you what the news is, right?
Mhm.
Wherein they were telling you the headlines of the newspapers every night for an hour, and that
And
was
that
it.
was it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then came the second phase, wherein they were now explaining you stuff. There were discussions, they were giving you opinions on the same news, they were giving you the left, right, and the center of the news.
Right, exactly.
In a
Yes,
sense,
yes. It's
yeah,
it's become less and less of reporting actual facts as they happen, and more of what we think about what happened, like my perception or my opinion, and which basically results in the propaganda of whoever has the largest
the,
share in your network, right?
the worst part is that now they have entered into the third phase of media, and that's where this becomes a drug, because now they are manufacturing news. They are not just telling you the news, they are not just explaining you the news, but they are actually manufacturing the news.
But how are they manufacturing news?
I mean, okay, so if you look at the news reports these days,
Hmm.
right, they can make anybody a rock star, and they can make anybody a beggar in a second.
All right, yeah,
They
yeah.
can make any situation look so huge, and they can make such an economic blunder like demonetization look nothing, right?
Right, right. So they're trying to I think in the words of Ronald Reagan, this is perception management that is happening on a mass scale with media houses, right?
Yeah,
But
of
I,
course.
I I really don't understand. I mean, see, apart from opposition and apart from the justice and enforcement system, media is supposed to be one pillar of democracy. How did we come to a point in time when democracy is practically ruling the entire world in its own sections? when if you count states as as specific entities. I mean, it is basically almost 80% of the world is a democracy right now, right? And at the same time, almost entirely, one of the major pillars of democracy, which is media, is almost non-existent. It's
Hello.
almost pseudo media. I cannot really trust any of the opinions that these guys are giving me. For that matter, I have never even asked anybody for their opinions unless I specifically want to go in and ask somebody an opinion. I'm just being bombarded with opinions and opinions and opinions instead of the actual facts. And even on the pretext of sharing actual facts with me, what I get is an opinionated, watered down or blown up version of events that they happen. So, and I mean, as of today, where do I turn to if I want actual news, or if I want actual facts of events that are happening? Do I really have any kind of a platform like that, or who do I trust?
So see, that's what it is. So before answering this question, that what is the platform wherein you can find the real news, or you can find the real aspects of what is going on, the reality of it. Before that, I would just mm, want to raise a point here that major governments of the world, and I mean again taking the example of India because that's what relevant to us, and that's what in front of us. They have technically with time in these in the particular regime, they have destroyed all these pillars, not just media, right? They have destroyed your enforcement directorate, they have destroyed your CAG, right to information kind of acts. They have destroyed your judiciary, they have destroyed your media. Now media is a business house, right? Media is a
Exactly, it's a profit
so
center.
yeah, it's a profit center. So it would run on profits. So anything that can run on profit, you can buy it, right? And that's easy. That was coming. That was the epitome of media, as one could say, wherein you're manufacturing news now rather than showing the news, right? You are basically selling an ideology. You're selling your leaders rather than criticizing them, because criticizing them require a lot of efforts, because you need to have everything in front of you, all the criticisms in front of you, but then it's very easy to praise. And this acts like subliminal perception. Have you heard this term, subliminal perception?
No, I was about to ask you that. I'm not aware of what that means.
So subliminal perception is a psychological term, but it is basically
Okay.
used in marketing and advertising, right? Wherein
Okay.
I am trying to inculcate a thought in your mind by not
Hmm.
directly saying it to you. So as we are discussing about these points right now, I am directly criticizing some points of democracy, and we are talking specifically on something, and we are very clear on what we are discussing, isn't it? But if you look at a lot of advertisements and a lot of marketing strategies, you would realize that they are inculcating thoughts in your mind without even you knowing it. So, like for example, associating PM Modi with, you know, um, as the word
Okay. Ritwik, a little louder, please. Here again, I keep losing your volume after
sorry,
a certain point. I
sorry,
don't know whether it is a network or something.
is it fine? I hope it's fine.
Yeah. So it gets better. I think whenever you're moving, it gets better, but slowly it starts fading away.
Sure, I'll keep that in mind. So, as we were discussing, so if you look at it, right, nobody actually told you that what Modi's background has been, or what our PM and BJP stands for. But
Hmm.
the thing is, if you look at even the movies these days, even if you look at marketing strategies of various products that are there in the market, you would see there is a sense of nationalism already getting inculcated into you, which is being driven to
Of
you
course.
from the ruling party's perspective, right? Now these are not
Right.
direct signals, these are not direct signals for asking for votes, or selling their whatever ideology that there is, but these
Hmm.
are subliminal messages that directly hit your subconscious. They don't enter your consciousness, they directly surpass it and enter into your unconscious or subconscious. And when
Right,
you start
right.
believing it,
So you're right. So, sorry about cutting you off here. So, what you mean is that whenever I'm thinking of make any company or making any buying decision, and I think about Make in India, it automatically connects me with the present ruling system or the present ruling party, right?
yeah, of course. I mean, acronyms in itself is kind of a subliminal perception,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I was searching about, I mean, because I'm interested, of course, in this topic, and I strongly believe in it. So I was searching about, how cults are established.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we'll talk about it later. There's an entire theory at the background of it. But as to answer your question as to how can you get to know that what is right and what is wrong and what is real and what is not, I believe that the only way to do it is by researching yourself, right, and creating your own perspectives. The difference between a perspective and a perception is that perspectives are always dependent on some solid proofs or some solid research, and perceptions are just taken at the highest of it.
Right. And because you're saying that I have, or I mean, society in general has very limited uh, amounts of time where it can focus on a given topic. I would usually not care about dwelling deep into everything and finding out every fact of what I'm hearing or what I'm reading in the newspapers or the social media platform, and just take their word for it, because I don't have like a few hours in a day every day where I deep down into every with every piece of news to actually find out what the truth is. That's what you mean, right? And that's where the whole dopamine thing kicks in, like for Facebook, for example, if I keep on searching a particular kind of post on Facebook, whether it is positive or negative, then the Facebook AI will keep on sending me more and more of of similar content. If Same thing with YouTube, or if I keep on searching for videos on funny dogs, then the next time in my suggestions or in the top of my page, it automatically kicks in funny dog videos and things like that. So
Definitely. And
that is just
you
reaffirming, what I already believe in. So don't you think that this is actually putting a curtain of on another perceptions, and like not allowing me to actually discover new things, etc., which was, which I thought is the whole idea of a social media platform, or a decentralized or a decentralized source of information in the first place.
Yeah, so it's like, your boss asking you to work hard so that, you can get a promotion. But he's asking you to work hard not to get the promotion, but he's asking you to work hard so that, the company can profit out of it. Getting my
Right.
point? You work from the perspective that, okay, I want to get a promotion.
Hmm.
But the real reason is that, the government needs to, oh, sorry, the company needs to, grow, right?
Yes.
Similarly, the social media came in as, giving you abundance of information or giving you abundance of knowledge, right, and making it accessible to everybody. But the real reason is something else. The real reason is to control your thinking. It's to control how you think and how you react and how you behave.
But then from an entrepreneur, and this is just straying off a little off topic like we did last time. I
Hmm.
mean, if I'm an entrepreneur, my first goal, or for example, if I'm Mark Zuckerberg back in 2000's first decade, my first thought would not ideally be controlling mindsets around the world, right? My first thought would be, how can I get more clicks? And this is like like killing two birds with the same stone, right? I'm getting more clicks because people get a dopamine kick out of whatever I'm presenting to them, and at
Hmm.
the same time it also curtails the kind of new discoveries, or the kind of new perceptions that they are able to form, because they're not because I am somehow curtaining that information or withholding that information from them. Whether I'm using AI for it or a manual operator for it is another question.
So see, the true, um, I mean, again, it's my opinion. It might not be right. It's not based on any theory or anything that I've read. But if I think of it in your lines, I believe that, even if you talk about from an entrepreneurial perspective, his idea wouldn't have been or shouldn't have been to get more clicks. His idea rather was much bigger than that. His idea was to create a virtual reality, right?
Okay.
A virtual society.
Yes, yes, that,
earlier
yeah, exactly.
earlier you used to talk with people in face to face, discuss things in a particular forum wherein you're meeting them and discussing it, whether it's your meeting groups or community herds, etc., etc. Now it is all in Facebook. And I know, like, even in our parents generation, they are doing it now on Facebook, right? They are not trained for it. They are trained to be in a community kind of system. We are trained to be on Facebook, we are trained to be on Instagram, we are trained to be there. And this is the dopamine kick that you get out of Facebook, because you can say whatever you want and you can get all the content that gives you pleasure. And at the same time, you don't have to put in so much of brain, because these use one very important thing, that is, I mean, another tool that there is in front of these this cult, as I would say, is the meme culture or the infographic culture, right?
Right.
Wherein for everything you now need an infographic. You don't need information, you need graphical representation of it,
Because of
because
lesser
because of
attention spans.
right, yeah, because of lesser attention span, because of less analysis into it, you're getting. So with a meme, what happens is, you don't have to think too much. You just see the meme, it reaffirms your belief, and that's done, right? No matter whether it's true, whether it's a lie, whether it's whatever,
Hmm.
it just gives you that kick and it's done. The job
Right.
is done.
But I would really want to I would really want to get back. Okay, so we've talked about media, which is one. We know for certain, I mean, that's not even up for debate, that wherever you are getting strong leaders out of democracy, like you have in India, like you have in Russia,
Mhm.
okay, so Russia not actually being a democracy of sorts, but like you have in like you have in most countries today. I mean, with the
Mhm.
emergence of strong democratic leaders, it is in some way killing off democracy in itself. So if you have a strong leader at the head of a democratic party, that means that he is going to completely annihilate the opposition. And once there is no mic in front of an opposition, that automatically is a deterrent to democracy, because one of the key things in a democracy is that you are opposed on everything, and that's how an opposition keeps check on whatever course of action the ruling party or the ruling government wants to take, right? So these two things are done here. But I mean, and we also do understand that, I mean, from a tyranny kind of a history, how we moved into democracy, that is basically because people they wanted more regions, larger audiences, etc. It became difficult for tyrants. It practically even now becomes very difficult for you to control a large group of people directly if you wish to do so. So the obvious answer is that you decentralize your power, or you give away your power to somebody, like for example, again going back to the entrepreneur or the corporate world. What you see is when you're working in a small startup, almost all of the decisions are being taken by the head of the company or the founder or the CEO, right? But as it grows, I mean, I'm now a $1 billion company, so I have a CHRO who's going to take human resource decisions for me. I'm going to have a marketing head who's going to take care of sales and revenue decisions for me. Then I'm going to have somebody else taking care of technology decisions for me, and so that is basically me giving away power to other people, me giving away decision making power to other people. And that's how democracies are born. And that's also how you see that when companies start growing, they slowly shift from a one man show to a more decentralized decision making entity, which in itself is a form of democracy. And that's how you come to boards, and you get elected onto boards, into CEOs, and so on and so forth. So this makes sense when you're as you very rightly pointed out, from Yuval's work from Sapiens, uh, that because you're living in a finite resource, because you're living in a piece of land which has got finite resource, and you grow in some because and you're always breeding more humans within that limited amount of space, and the kind of resources that you can cultivate or consume out of that limited finite piece of land is always by nature of the planet is going to be finite. You would obviously want to expand, and the more you expand, the more people you are, it becomes difficult for one person to do it. And as we are getting larger and larger and larger in terms of community, we are looking at more decentralized decision making. But what I again, now moving to the second part of this, I mean, what you see here, or what you actually experience happening, or what we are seeing is a cusp of change in that kind of behavior, or in that kind of management system, if I were to call a government that. Because see, we've been hearing for quite some time now that we're looking at one world, one government theories, and we're looking at universal basic income. So do you think that we are going to go on a full circle, and there will be a time where the entire planet is being ruled by, I don't know, 20 odd people who are elected or by whatever means chosen to represent our interest, etc., on the world stage, and then they are going to be calling a shot?